You know, my plan at some point was to not do Marvel videos for at least a little while after I got the drive to make videos again. I was a fool! Anyway, I guess I'm back now, kind of. And you gotta deal with it. Wish there'd be more pomp and circumstance, but I'm beginning to learn that maybe wanting things has been my problem this whole time. And that at least some level of ludicrous perfectionism is the reason basically none of the videos I've planned to make in the past year and a half have gotten past the scripting stage. And look, I refuse to let the turnaround on this video be more than like 3 days tops, so I've really gotta curb myself here. I'd meant for my first real video back to be one which is still MCU related and still upcoming, more about the theatrical output of last year and definitely much lengthier. Don't be shocked if I step away from Marvel-related videos after I finish that one, but I'd actually just rewatched Wandavision for its 1-year anniversary. And there were many feelings felt, chief among which being a desire to smack myself upside the head along with anyone else in the online discourse who made it so this show's utter brilliance was completely forgotten and eclipsed in the face of what I'll readily admit is still a pretty messy final episode. But even accepting the flaws of its finale, WandaVision is a straight-up masterpiece, easily the best of the Disney Plus shows, and in my opinion, even better than a majority of the movies. That I or anyone else was left so cold by an initial viewing of the final episode that I spent all year thinking Loki, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, or Hawkeye could even hold a candle is embarrassing. And I like those 3 shows a lot. So you know what I want to do? I want to gush for a couple minutes in a completely slapdash way about why I think WandaVision holds up a year later, and why we should be looking back on it with more fondness and respect. Talking about the title characters, fleshing out comparatively smaller roles has been the biggest boon of all the D+ shows. I've always liked Loki, Sam Wilson, Clint Barton, and significantly less so Bucky Barnes. They were all performed really well, and you got a sense of defined, dynamic character from their dialogue and actions in the films. The same is absolutely true for the Vision and Wanda Maximoff, but something I've realized is that amongst all the characters I've mentioned, Wanda is the one who went the longest without any kind of clear ethos. On a base, fundamental level, I could tell you what drives Loki, or Sam, or Clint, or Vision before any of them got their own shows. For Wanda, the idea that she's someone who struggles to process a lifetime of loss was definitely in the text of her filmic appearances, but it took WandaVision to really click the pieces into place and make her into a character with a unique guiding idea that separated her from the pack. And as the crux of the show, I think that idea is handled brilliantly. In a universe full of constantly suffering characters, the show positions Wanda as among those who suffered the most, and is also the individual least equipped to process any of it. Whoever's idea it was to take the suburban plotline of the Wanda and Vision comics and extrapolate that into a TV show about TV shows deserves a damn medal, because that single idea breaks Wanda's character wide open, and makes this whole show maybe the most interesting thematic piece the MCU has ever done. WandaVision is a show in a franchise that's been seen by so many as almost exclusively fluff media, about how one woman's reliance on fluff media as her sole coping mechanism ends up suffocating an entire community in her unprocessed grief, and, intentionally or not, threatens to make her a complete monster. That's a really bitingly on-the-nose metaphor, and I'm shocked I haven't seen more people talk about it in the context of fandoms, or even just a more general sense of losing oneself in media obsession. In the 21st century, it's almost like we're conditioned to wrap ourselves in an emotional cocoon of comfort media, and the price of doing that is often, well, dehumanizing. To us and those around us. It's praiseworthy messaging coming from the MCU, especially as a first foot forward in the pandemic era, where people are more likely than ever to bury themselves in something frivolous like Wanda does. I mean, we all remember the great Friends resurgence of 2020, right? No one tell them I've still only watched like 4 episodes of Friends. Wait, is this thing on? But anyway, like many aspects of the MCU when put under a microscope, this theming also serves to make the franchise itself look less frivolous. By making network sitcoms fill the slot of Wanda's fluffy comfort media, the show in part asserts the MCU itself as not merely a popcorn roller coaster, by virtue of how much it's built on consequence and suffering. It would almost be insidious if I didn't think the show was mature enough to treat the sitcoms it talks about with just as much reverence and nuance as it does critique and wariness. That's where the real merit of having someone like Darcy is. Someone who is whole hog for uncritically enjoying the Wandavision sitcom, and because she can do that, can see the real underlying emotion underpinning the show better than anyone else on the outside can.
I've been watching Wandavision for the past week, and the love you two have is real.
Wandavision is a show made by its performances, in part because it's a show about performance. Elizabeth Olsen has to play Wanda Maximoff playing a sitcom housewife, and the desperation she has to keep the ruse going contributes just as much to the sad, unsettling nature of things as the clearly tortured, strained performances of the Westview citizens. Every actor threads the needle immaculately, making me wish I had a whole show that was just their sitcom counterparts one moment and then reeling at the sheer disturbance of their hostage situation the next. No one threads better than Paul Bettany, though. Dude has to wholeheartedly sell the sitcom husband bit in the first third of the show, then basically play the protagonist of a horror thriller in Act 2, and then, by the finale, he has to find the genuine heart in the mix of those two takes. We're basically watching a construct of a man forge some real personhood over the course of 9 episodes, and only an actor of Bettany's caliber could have pulled it off. I'd totally be down to watch like 3 or 4 seasons of the totally earnest, not at all sinister version of the WandaVision sitcom. But given that, I think the show is at its best when it's playing for horror and sadness. Every episode has at least one moment that fills me with nothing short of absolute dread. And that the feeling is conveyed even when you know everything that happens is again down to the performers, but especially Liz Olsen, who makes acting Wanda as an almost literal monster look easy as flipping a switch. The way the general vibe and atmosphere of the sitcom just gets more and more uncomfortable and empty feeling as the show goes is downright oppressive on top of everything else. A not indispensable part of this is Agatha, and after a full year of agonizing over whether or not I really liked her character, I've ultimately decided that yeah, Agatha Harkness is actually a pretty good villain. That's not true for everyone, and I think it's the show's own fault for being weirdly coy about exploring her motivations in dialogue for a long time. There's a lot of episode 9 spent wondering exactly why she's doing anything she's doing until it clicks into place. But regardless of that, at the core, her position relative to Wanda serves the story greatly. Kathryn Hahn plays the snide derision to perfection, and it becomes more uncomfortable than funny, as she plays like the toxic person who would rather hurt the already suffering Wanda to force her out of her coping mechanism than she would try to earnestly help her achieve something healthy. Making Wanda face the fakeness and harmfulness of her charade is ultimately for the good of everyone, but while Vision and Monica do it with love and empathy, Agatha does it with this needling, impatient condescension. Even Agatha All Along ties into this. It's not just a bop of a song, it's Agatha after episodes of playing along with Wanda's game, choosing to corrupt the aesthetic Wanda loves so much in this very mean-spirited way, before she ditches the charade for good. Taken in Wanda's POV, this whole song sequence reads as incredibly cruel, and it's cathartic to see the arc Wanda goes on, from relying on Agatha to recognizing her toxicity at the same time that she's able to recognize her own. Here's the thing about WandaVision. It's not just a show about grief. It doesn't just showcase Wanda's trauma and show her getting over it by blasting the evil witch. The final episode of WandaVision is overstuffed. Hayward is utterly wasted potential and a totally two-dimensional plot device who the rest of this show is frankly better than. Beyond just being a stupid joke, the whole Ralph Boner reveal undercuts the otherwise pretty clever use of fake Pietro within the story by failing to justify Evan Peters' casting. Pivoting so hard into an action climax after an entire show with 0 action scenes is jarring, and Agatha's role as Wanda's antagonist is hurt by having to share time with all these other elements. But you know what? Shame on me and everyone else for letting those things supersede what really matters about this episode in our discussion of it. Namely, how it ends Wanda's story. How it resolves her grief, her lifetime of loss after loss after loss. The show gives us Wanda, this poor woman with no way to process her grief beginning from childhood, save the stories that she's watched where no one ever really gets hurt and actions have no consequence. She sees her own pain and the pain of others, and she forces that sheen on them, builds that world for them and for herself because she doesn't know how else to achieve peace, reprieve from all the loss. And then, We end with the idea that the real reprieve for Wanda is to lose again, by choice. Wanda's means of truly processing the grief that life has forced on her is to impart it on herself by letting go. By giving herself a family, a love, a life in a country that's not war-torn, and then giving all of that up. It's what allows her some degree of control in her life for maybe the first time ever. That's what allows her to grieve. All she really needed was the chance to, for once, actually say goodbye. I don't care about Hayward, I don't care about Ralph Boner, I don't care that we spend 20-odd minutes on lasers and punching to get there. The way that WandaVision ends its story is masterful. WandaVision is masterful. The world is better for it existing as it does, and I like to think that I am too. Here's to 1 year. Well, like I said, totally slapdash. Here's hoping that it ends up working for anybody, and that those of you who did enjoy it will like this video, share it around, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Like I said, this is not the project that I wanted to end my hiatus with, but I was just too emotionally affected revisiting this show to not talk about why. And to not give it its due by at least making the last time I talk about it on this channel something more positive. But hey, what do you think? Have you revisited WandaVision at all since it aired? If you have, or if this video inspired you to give it a second look, why don't you tell me what you thought in the comments? Stay tuned for more down the line, and I'll see you in the future.